Hopefully
Well,
everyone's doing well. We are going to jump right in because we're running a few minutes late, which is okay. Um, so we're on our final. I can't believe we've done six of these already, but we were going to do this for 6 weeks, and this is our final day, which feels like it flew by. Maybe not for you, but for me. Um, and I think we've covered some really interesting topics. This morning, we are going to talk about yard sites and how we observe yard sites. This is a question that came up from one of you, from some of you, and it's actually, I think, uh, one of the harder ones to cover because there's not a lot of, I feel like I say this every time, but there's not a lot of, there are not a lot of sources on it. And interestingly, so here's where I'll tell you it's not a secret, where I get my sources. Um, so I usually start with the Shulchan Aruch and the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which are two halachic sources, sort of after the 1500s. That's where I start, and then I go to the Klein, which I don't think I have up here, but you've seen me reference it before. That big book called Jewish Religious Practice by Rabbi Isaac Klein, who has basically taken the Shulchan Aruch and other sources and put them into one place where you can look on the index and look for words like yard site, for example, and find everything that he has to say about that. And then I use Safaria. Oh, there it is. Thank you, Todd. That's it. I use Safaria. They have an unbelievable set of resources, and you can see if other rabbis or teachers have made source sheets on this by typing into the source sheet search, for example, yard sites. Okay, which zero came up yesterday, just in case you were wondering. And my final step is to check Rabbi Google, right? Is to Google yard site and to see what other people have said about it. That's not always reputable, obviously, right? So you have different rabbis and scholars and teachers and whoever, right? Anybody can sort of write an article or some research on Google, but it's interesting to see what other people have to say and how different communities observe yard sites, particularly because we know, probably all of you here know, that any synagogue you go to, you're going to see it done differently. So I wanted to how should I start? So I let me share my screen. I wanted to just start by telling you sort of my process for going through and looking for these sources because when I hit my final destination over the weekend and a little bit yesterday, when I hit my final destination of Google, when you Google yard site customs, the one thing that comes up over and over and over and over is fasting, which I don't know that anybody here really has ever done. I mean, that's not something that we really do anymore. There's not a whole lot of sources on when it stopped and all that. There is a lot about when it started, so I'm going to show you some of that and we can talk about it. But when I personally think of the rituals and the customs around yard sites, fasting is not one that is at the top of my list. I'm seeing some heads shaking, like maybe not at the top of your list either. I wanted to start off with this quote, though, that's which I found in one of the articles I was reading about yard site that says, "There is no closure, there is transformation." And I think that kind of sets the scene a little bit for what ritual around death and dying is supposed to be in Judaism. We know, of course, for those of you who have lost loved ones, that you never sort of check the boxes of doing the ritual and then your grief is over, right? Grief is sort of a lifelong lesson, if you will, a lifelong experience, and it's sort of always changing. And the yard site is the piece that for all of us comes up every single year, and you can experience it differently every single year. Um, just to give a little bit of context. Oh, and also the yard site the word is in Yiddish. It means time of year or year time, right? The sort of marking annually of a day of death. So who do we mourn for in Judaism? Mother, father, sister, brother, husband, wife, son, or daughter. So you might look at this list and say, what question, the question that might come up is, well, can I mourn for somebody who isn't on that list? The answer is, of course. The answer is that the mourning process is very much a personal one, and one that you can sort of decide on your own. But in our sources, in our text, it tells us that these are the people that you're supposed to mourn for. And what does that mean? It means that these are the people that you're supposed to do the ritual around. So when you talk about kavod hamet, when the person has died, and how you do the funeral and how you do the burial and how you sit shiva and shloshim and your 11 months of kaddish, really they're talking about these eight these 8 people, these 8 sort of stems of your relatives, the closest ones in your lives, obviously. And of course, we've seen at Beth Shalom, right? When people show up and do an aunt or a grandmother or something like that, and it's perfectly okay. But just to know that the rituals are more sort of bound, if you will, halakhically bound or expected from these relatives. So before we really get into all of this, I want to just ask, what is your custom? Like, if you were to just sort of say, this is how I remember my loved one, this is what I do on a yard site. I just was curious if people were willing to give us, 30 seconds about what is your custom, or about what is the custom that you either grew up with or a custom of your family, because you're going to see in the sources, a lot of times it says, here's what the source says, and what you should do is follow the custom of your family, right? We get that a lot. Here's what the source says, and really you should follow the custom of your rabbi, or something like that. And so I wanted to just start off by hearing, what people's customs are, what maybe is a custom of your family, whether you think it's sort of different or pretty standard, if anybody wants to share. Ruth, just make sure you unmute.
I kind of do I do more than I was going to say my mom did, my parents. I light the yahrzeit candle at the night before. When Beth Shalom was open, I did go to evening minyan and minyan the morning after, the morning of, and just thought a lot about the person that I'm saying yahrzeit for. I always am unsure, and I'm glad you're doing this topic, if I should say something when I light the yahrzeit candle, what I should say. I mean, I say things to myself about the person, but I never knew that there's something, or is there something that one says when lighting the yahrzeit candle or not?
Great. There are a lot of sort of meditations around kavanot that have been written around lighting the yahrzeit candle. Sometimes you'll see the yahrzeit candle might come with a little card, and it might have something for you to say, like kind of like on the back, the back of the Hanukkah candles has all your brachot, but there isn't a blessing, if that's your question, right? There isn't a specific blessing to say. One thing that you touched on was the evening and the morning minyan. So our sources do say that you're supposed to go to all of the minyanim of the day, right? 3 times, right? At Beth Shalom, we only have 2. So you've done your due diligence for sure. And so that's a good one, right? To come in the evening and then also to come in the morning. Betsy.
I know that my dad used to, he was a doctor, and he would go to, to do a regular work day. He didn't take the Hagim off, the Yom Tovim, but he would go to a synagogue that was near to his hospital and go on the days that you say Kaddish. So on all the Yom Tovim and, obvious Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, but that was something that at some point in my mid years, I guess I got to learn that he was doing. I don't even remember if I saw yahrzeit candles lit except Erev Yom Kippur. I don't know. But in the last years, I mean, as I have my parents to remember, and I also was involved with the Chabad thing. So I light candles on all of those Yom Tovim, but one for everyone as opposed to in one for each person, and then light also on their yahrzeit. And I agree with Ruth. It's kind of, you stand there and you go like, what am I supposed to be saying here? So you just kind of think. I kind of try to think, my parent or whatever. But I took on, in some more recent years after my mother's death, I started realizing my dad was the one who probably said certainly Kaddish for his parents. I don't know, his siblings or whatever. Now that I've gotten more information, I've recently tried to take on my grandparents. And even though I don't have much to say or anything, but otherwise they're not being remembered. And it's so interesting that grandparents, when no one else who, more appropriate is like that, it's like as if they're memory goes bloop, and
Yeah.
it's like gone. So that's an interesting thing that we don't have that in the formal structure.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I'll say, just because you both brought it up, is if you, again, I use Google a little bit for sort of looking to see what other people have to say. And there are a lot of covenant around what to do when you light the candle. So if you're interested, you can look and you maybe will find something that's meaningful to you.
Well, Sinai actually sends something out when they send you a reminder, or not,
yeah.
or that maybe not Sinai, maybe it's the mortuary from Chicago, but when they send the reminder, there's a thing that comes with that also,
Right.
sort of suggestion.
Thank you. Gary and then Marcia.
Two things. First of all, sometimes a year we do have 3 services. I know there's, when my mother's yahrzeit falls, I know Max is always saying the last Kaddish for his mother during Mincha, and I do the first one for my mother during Mariv. So it really depends on the time of year. But I just wanted to say about, and it goes following on Betsy's, about saying it for grandparents and other people. So, and I always find it fascinating that, generally Orthodox will frown on that. Yet at the same time, they'll encourage you to pay someone else to say Kaddish for you if you can't do it. And I just think about saying Kaddish for other people as facilitating a mitzvah for those who don't have someone saying Kaddish for them, or the person who it is chiyuv, that mitzvah of saying Kaddish for them, can't do it, and I'm facilitating it for them. And so therefore it's a mitzvah in itself to say it for people whom you may not be required to.
Great. Thanks, Gary. Marcia. And then Catherine, I see you.
Okay, my parents only, like Betsy's, only lit yahrzeit candles on Erev Yom Kippur. They never celebrated the yahrzeits of their parents. And I didn't know too much until my father died and I decided to say Kaddish for him. So I started coming to Morning Minyan. And so the only minhagim I know are the ones that are done here. The one thing I think I probably break.
Lucky you, Marcia. Lucky you.
There's no friction because I only know this. The only thing that I probably do wrong, and I'm not going to change it, is my father died after we lit the Hanukkah candles, which means he died in the evening. And I was physically there when he died. And so I light his yahrzeit candle actually after we light the Hanukkah candles, because that's when he died. I do not light it the night before he died, because he died at night. And that's sort of something I'm wondering about. So I light him at the night he died, and then I come to shul and I say Kaddish the next day. Sounds
right to me.
Oh, okay.
Sounds right to me, because the day in Judaism starts in the night.
Okay, because that just seems better.
No. I think you're absolutely right.
And as Gary said, I only say Kaddish, celebrate my father's yahrzeit, but I do think that I'm the only one who would say Kaddish for any of my aunts and uncles and grandparents.
Yeah.
But I'm not exactly sure when their yahrzeits are exactly. So,
yeah.
And these are people I know.
Sure.
I grew up with and I knew, as opposed to people who died, before I was born.
Yeah, I know some people take it on for family members who have passed away, and sometimes they just say, well, this person was really important to my husband, so I take this one on, or etc. Catherine, and then I think we'll look at some sources.
I was just gonna say, for people who are like friends and things, I mean, I might do it, but I check first with their relatives and get permission to see, just to find out, because I sort of feel like, I don't know, I don't want to say disrespectful, but I sort of feel like it's as if to say that person doesn't have relatives who would say Kaddish for them, that I have to do it. Does that sound right? I don't know. So that's why I feel like I kind of like want to keep it limited for me. I don't just because there's lots of people who have died that I really love, but it doesn't, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, we've talked about a lot about that when, we talk about the Shechianu or other customs, and how often do you do it? And if you do it all the time, does it sort of lose its meaning? And especially for this, where it's such a personal custom, I agree that if I was saying it for somebody, I would want them to know, or at least want their relative to know. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And the other thing that I do, I like to give tzedakah, like for Sarah like donated her time and her money to American World Service. Well, to Beth Shalom too, but so like, I always like to remember her that way.
Yeah.
To make
there's a lot of really nice sources about tzedakah, which I'll show you. So that's you're right on target. Okay, let's jump over to the text a little bit. Okay, so I'm gonna, as usual, I sort of start with the oldest and go to the newest, if you will. So back in the Torah, right, in the original source, if you will, we have two times where death and ritual and perhaps not necessarily yahrzeit, but sort of kavod hamet, right? Like honoring the dead is mentioned. And the first is in Numbers about when Aaron died. The whole community knew that Aaron had died. All the house of Israel bewailed Aaron for 30 days. So here's a source about Shloshim, right? About the 30 days of mourning after the death. And then in Deuteronomy, when they're talking about war and how to treat the body, if somebody were to die in war, you must not let his corpse remain on the stake overnight, but must bury him the same day. For an impaled body is an affront to God. You shall not defile the land that the Lord your God has given you to possess. So this idea that we are quick to bury, which you probably know also, that has been quite challenging in COVID, particularly in places like Los Angeles and others where mortuaries and cemeteries have gotten completely overrun, unfortunately, and has been really hard, I think, for the Jewish community to sort of stick to what they think is ritual and what they think is right. And also deal with the times. But we do everything that we can to bury the body quickly, of course, with exceptions. Sometimes the bodies have to be shipped to other places. Sometimes the body is in another place and has to come back to where the burial is supposed to be. But by and large, we do our best to have a speedy burial. And the last is from Psalms, which you probably know from the Yizkor service and from the burial service also. Though I walk through the depth of death's shadow, I feel no harm, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So this is just a line, sort of a reminder that death is not necessarily scary, and that God is sort of always with us through death and through those next steps. Betsy, did you have a question?
No, but I just had a comment.
Oh.
Sinai, can I do that, or you don't want me to right now?
No, it's okay, fine.
Now in COVID for us, Sinai doesn't do tahara during COVID. They had it was actually an article in the J, but I experienced this when an elder friend that I help a lot died and was trying to get information about how the burial would be done. And she had to actually be transported from the hospital to a mortuary in the South Bay, where the South Bay Kedushah has a space to work. And the body was there able to be prepared with the ritual process and then returned back to coma. So it did take that extra time, but it wasn't as inefficient, because for people who weren't Jewish, some people down there were like, their bodies were waiting 3 weeks for preparation and burial.
Yeah, so those restrictions around tahara, around washing and cleansing the body and things have shifted like almost every week since COVID started, and they're getting back to some semblance of normal. Marcia, you're muted.
I don't know, maybe this is translation or something, but what's this business of not letting his corpse remain on the stake?
Oh, well,
this like only people who are murdered.
Yeah, so this was in this is in the section that's talking about like there's a whole lot of laws, and if this happens, if that happens, if you're at war, if you're not, that's where I grabbed it from. So yeah, don't read too much into that. So much more about the body. So Talmud actually gives us what we think is kind of our earliest source about yahrzeit. And of course, interestingly, as I was saying to you, I found all this, literature sources on fasting, and that's essentially what the Talmud is telling us. So the Gemara raises an objection based on the Breita, which is the following paragraph, based on something that happened before, which we don't have to worry about it, which is the vow prohibition Isar mentioned in the Torah. It is a case where one said, I hereby declare that I will not eat meat and I will not drink wine today, like the day his father died. referring to the father of the individual making the vow, like the day his teacher died, and then it sort of lists other fasts of the year, like the fast of Gedalia, right, was killed. We have that one fast during the year. And so specifically says here about drinking meat or about drinking wine and eating meat. So there is definitely, it doesn't say necessarily in this one line, it doesn't say fasting completely, but it does sort of say you're not supposed to like indulge yourself in things that are maybe fancy or something that is, more than you might eat on a regular basis. Now, some of us might say that's not more than I eat on a regular basis, but it's all to say you're not really supposed to indulge in something that might be considered like a joyful meal on a day of remembrance, on a day of Yartzeit. The sources have taken that a step farther and have sort of interpreted that as fasting. And again, like I found all this early source on fasting, but then never where it actually ended, right? Because clearly it ended, because not many of us know about that and observe that today. But so just so you have that context of the Talmud, this is one of the first places where we see sort of any reference of what of what a Yartzeit might look like. So to me, there are 3 traditional observances, and I left fasting in the parentheses so that we could look at it together. But just to know again that it's not one that that I've seen recently. If anybody has any objection to that or has anything to share around that, I'm happy to hear. But I had never really I've never really heard of anybody fasting on a Yartzeit day, other than of course Yom Kippur, which is like the big sort of day of remembrance. So the 3 traditional observances are saying Kaddish, some of you mentioned, lighting a candle, some of you mentioned, giving tzedakah, Catherine, and the last one is fasting. So, you can all, those of you who came here wondering if you do it right, Marcia says I do it wrong, but she doesn't. You can sort of give yourself a pat on the back that you are, doing what the rituals tell us to do. Interestingly, just to add, because it didn't really fall into any of the 4 categories that I have here, if one does not know the date of the Yartzeit, Marcia, it specifically says your parents' death, but you can extend it. One should select a day in which to observe it, right? So it doesn't say just forget about it. It says, try to figure out, like, was it March? Was it April? And pick a day that works and observe it if that's something that's meaningful to you. So I like that, actually. Kind of gives you a chance to, I think particularly also, around the Holocaust, when you didn't necessarily know when a person died, it's important to remember that they don't just, as I think Betsy said, fall off the map, right? Like their memory sort of goes on, and you're able to choose a day to do that. Marty, did you want to ask a question, or you're saying goodbye?
I was listening.
Oh, that's okay.
But when you mentioned, sometimes I can't remember, or if I couldn't find a Yortzeit date, this might be a little strange, but you can call if you know where they were buried, you can call them, or find out, maybe.
Definitely. We get those calls all the time. My father was a member of Beth Shalom for 30 years. We get that all the time. But I'm talking like, I think what this source is saying is like way far back, right? When maybe there's not a record or.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Catherine.
I was just going to say, if you know the date and time, but you're confused, you can go to HebeCal on the internet and it calculates it for you.
That's right. Yeah,
and it even gives you a file to add to your calendar so you never forget.
Oh, wow. That's very fancy. See, I sometimes use Yartzeit Calculator, which is in Chabad, and it tells you all the days, right? It'll say Shloshim ends, Shiva ends, it gives you everything. Yeah. Okay, so let's look at some of the observances that are in the synagogue. This is probably going to be the most fascinating one for us because, well, you'll see. So saying Kaddish and other synagogue observances. So this comes out of the section of the Orach Chaim of the Shulchan Aruch that's talking about how to conduct a Torah service. So it says, literally it says, you do 7 aliyot, and then if it's a double parsha, this is where it's opening. On a Shabbat where the parshas are joined, so if it's a double parsha, we recite the Haftarah for the second parsha. Has nothing to do with Yartzeits. I just wanted you to see where the source came from. And then embedded in that, the Ramah, who comments on the Shulchan Aruch, says, it is our custom to remember the names of the departed after the reading of the Torah. Now, somewhere along the line, obviously predates me and predates Rabbi Ain. Somebody here can tell me, I'm sure. Some rabbi of Beth Shalom said that we don't do Yartzeits on Shabbat. And we don't do Yartzeits on Shabbat at Congregation Beth Shalom. But I will tell you, maybe I'm going to be turning it on its head going forward here. The most common time to do a Yartzeit is on Shabbat morning by getting an aliyah to the Torah and then having an El Maleh said for your loved one. Or if, I know everyone's like, what? Or if you don't do it on Shabbat morning because there are too many, this is what the synagogue, you can see this next part here, since any number of deceased persons may be mentioned in the same memorial prayer, many large synagogues have adopted the custom of saying the memorial prayer after the Torah reading at Mincha. So, but those are like the two biggest sort of most popular times to say the yard site. And here we are, Beth Shalom. Jean's going to give us the history. Here it comes. Yes.
Well, I remember when Saul White was our rabbi that we did it on Shabbat morning. Is that correct, Ruth? Ruth is
Right. Yeah, we did.
And then when Rabbi Lou came, he would always do it for Friday night Shabbat service. And he would gather the group of people. I have such a strong memory of being in the old sanctuary upstairs when we would get a kind of a big crowd for Friday night. And he would gather everyone around him and to do an El Mole and ask people for the names of their loved ones. And he would recite, and add everybody's name. And then I don't know why, but I think he was the one who said we wouldn't do it on Shabbat morning somehow. I don't know why.
It could be because of time. At some point
Yeah.
you get, a flood of yard sites and your service is 30 minutes longer on Shabbat morning. So it could be because of time. I'm just taking some guesses here. It could be
I was around at that time too.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, there were a lot of people who wanted to have it on Saturday. It didn't matter that wasn't the exact day that their yort site was
That's
on.
right.
So there were never enough aliyot.
Right.
And he would do these acharon aliyots, sometimes 4 and 5 during one Torah reading.
When you say
Okay.
he, to whom are you?
Rabbi Lou, he didn't change it right away.
Didn't.
He didn't
So,
change
right,
it right
so-
away.
So an acharon aliyah is like when you add an aliyah to the end of the Torah service. So you could get up to 13 or 14 aliyot just to be able to give people a chance to say yard site. So right, I think that's right, Catherine, which is that people would show up on Shabbat because Shabbat was more convenient than coming necessarily during the week or on the actual day. And then you'd have a whole bunch of yard sites to observe where they weren't actually the day of the yard site. That being said, I think that we sort of take a middle ground at this point, which is that there are people that come on Shabbat to observe a yard site and have an aliyah if their loved one is being remembered in the following week, right? So you might come and have an aliyah on a Shabbat when your yard site's not until Tuesday or something like that. I'm fairly certain that's what our letter encourages you to do, right? You can show up now virtually on Friday night when we read the names, and in the past on the Saturday morning to have an aliyah. But it's just to say that the El Male also, it seems, was also said, in the morning, and that's quite an interesting custom. I think that there's also some maybe misconceptions around what the El Male is, which is why I brought it here, because I think that sometimes it's perhaps thought of as petitionary, and you're not supposed to petition on Shabbat. And so that's also one of the reasons I think that it has been taken out of Shabbat, though I know that there are many, many congregations that still do it this way. This is my own commentary, which is to say, it's kind of summing up all the sources that I found and read and didn't bring here. But essentially, that the El Male is very much connected to the Torah service. There's something about the Torah service, whether it's what we've talked about before as, market days and people are coming out and people are all there on those days, or if it's actually related, directly to pulling the Torah out of the ark. We know as our custom at, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that at Mincha, what we would do is or Mincha Mariv is if we weren't reading the Torah, like we would open the doors, or maybe in the morning, if we weren't reading the Torah, we would open the doors at least to the ark, right? To sort of acknowledge that the El Male was connected to the Torah service, Torah in some way. So here's the El Male. You'll see there's an
Just
extra.
two things. The opening of the ark was Rabbi Glazer. He didn't like that we did the El Male and there was no connection to Torah. So he continued doing it and opened it. The other question I have just quickly, when we send our letters, it says you say Kaddish on the Shabbat before the yort site. At least that's the way I read it. Is there any tradition on that or any?
I think that this is I think it's exactly what we just read. I mean, I think that it's essentially saying You can show up on the day if you'd like to come to regular daily minyan, and if not, join us for the week, because when we read the yahrzeit names, we say these are the names of the coming week. And so that's the custom that I think most congregations do that, and sort of say.
Can you say too many though? I mean, if you are coming during the week, do you still say it on that Shabbat?
Kaddish?
Yeah.
I think Kaddish is okay. Yeah. I mean, I might not do 2 El Males, but I would make, and for no particular reason other than it's maybe a lot. But the Kaddish I think is okay. Yeah. El Male. So here's the prayer that we remember our loved ones with. This is the Hebrew. If you're reading the Hebrew, is the male version, but I tried to change the pronouns in the translation, so at least you can see. God, full of mercy, who dwells in the heights, provide a sure rest upon the divine presence. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Ruth. Within the range of the holy, pure, and glorious, whose shining resemble the skies, to the soul of the Hebrew name, son or daughter of the Hebrew name of his or her parent, for a charity was given to the memory of his soul. So this is this part that I just read about the charity, about tzedakah. That's the origin of giving tzedakah in a loved one's memory. Though, if you were to pull out our Siddur Sim Shalom, or the versions that we do in our yahrzeit books, this line about tzedakah is not there. It was taken out at some point, so you can see that there are 2 versions of the El Male, but I wanted to bring you this one so that we could get a little bit of context around tzedakah. Therefore, the Master of Mercy will protect him or her forever from behind the hidings of his wings, will tie his or her soul with the rope of life. The everlasting is his or her heritage, and he or she shall rest peacefully upon his or her lying place, and let us say amen. So you can see it's very much not petitionary. It's more about sort of preserving the soul and the memory of the loved one, and that their soul and their memory sort of always live on in God's kingdom, if you will. And so when you read it this way, I think that there really is no problem with saying it on Shabbat. I'm not sure where that was. Again, I have to imagine that it had to do with what Catherine was saying, that there were so many, or there was like a time issue or something, but that it really doesn't have to do with the sort of the rituals or the practices around Shabbat specifically, because there's nothing here in this prayer that would lead me to feeling that way. I don't know if other people feel differently. Yeah, Sandy.
I had to go in and out before, so I don't know if this came up, but okay. On Yizkor, which is on Yom Kippur, and on the Hall of Hogs, you say these El Moles.
That's right. Yeah. So generally what we do at our custom, and I would say most customs of many synagogues, is to say 1 El Male for the 6 million who died in the Holocaust, as well as 1 El Male for all the deceased of the community. And then I think we pointed this out last week when we studied Kaddish, that there's also that small memorial prayer that you say sort of personally, which isn't exactly an El Male, but it's has similar language. And you actually pointed out that the tzedakah line was in there, and so as another way of remembering this sort of elevating by giving tzedakah. Yeah, Gary.
Is there a line missing in the translation? Because I mean, when I read the Hebrew, I mean, there's the no line about the Gan Eden. It goes right to Master of Mercy and on the wings, but there's nothing about.
Yeah, you're probably right. There is maybe a line. Hold on, let me see. Ba'avor shenazu tzedakah, charity given in memory, right? Has karat nishmato, right, and then yes, you're right. So there's this idea of resting in Gan Eden, and actually we're going to see that in tzedakah in a minute. Betsy, maybe you have your hand, but you walked away. So if you're there, okay, we'll keep. Oh, there she's there. Oh, you're muted though.
Sandy said something. Oh yeah, one of my extreme pet peeves is, I guess there's a minhag. I think most people grew up with that if they're traditional, that you don't stay in during Kaddish at Yizkor, not a weekday or something, but you don't stay in for the Yizkor Kaddish or for Yizkor service if your parents are alive. So I guess if one parent is dead, then you do stay in, but if both parents are alive, then you don't. And I have always felt like synagogues need to, if people want to observe that, that's great, but before the Mole for the Holocaust or for all the martyrs or whatever, I really feel like people should be encouraged to be back in there, or that should be done first before people leave. This is communal, it should be, in my opinion, communal responsibility and communal blessing. And it just seems like the weirdest thing for only the people who are already mourners to be remembering.
Well,
These
I don't want
communal-
to go too far off the derech here, but I would encourage you to ask somebody why they leave, and I guarantee that it's because their parent also did that, right? It's a custom of a family,
exactly.
right? And I don't know, but I'm not, you know, it feels superstitious. My mom always left. I'm not saying for myself. I'm just saying what I've heard. You know, my mom always walked out during that because it feels superstitious, and I remember that growing up, that everyone would sort of gather in the hallways, and you know, you'd peek in, are they done yet, etc. And as a prayer leader, I'll tell you, for the first time when I led Yisker, I thought to myself, like, is this okay, right? Because thank God both of my parents are alive, and here I am leading the prayer, and sort of did my own, you know, like not research, but self-checking, and feel very much the way you do, Betsy, which is that I don't feel superstitious about that, but I know that many people do, and I don't want to go down that road. So let's look at lighting the yard site candle. So Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says very plainly, it is customary to light a candle, a yard site candle. It says an electric light may be used, right? So it's not necessarily about the flame itself, like, for example, Shabbat candles or something like that. It's about sort of memorializing in some way, and whatever that candle might mean to you. I know my grandfather definitely had an electric light. We inherited that when he passed away. It was like a very classic gold. Anyway, so I have memories of that. And then the light sort of coming from this verse in Proverbs, which says the human soul is the lamp of God. And a yahrzeit candle should be lit on the evening of the anniversary. So as we know, the day in Judaism, the day starts in the evening. If the anniversary falls on Shabbat or on a holiday, the yahrzeit candle is lit before the Shabbat or holiday candles, and the candle typically will burn for 24 hours. Some people you might ask about a double. If there's 2 days of Chag, right? Would you light it way before? I would say that you would light it before. There's a lot of conversation. Gary said he could teach his own class on Adar, right? When there's one Adar, is that what you said? Adar 1 and Adar 2. Then they're leap years, and what happens if Rosh Chodesh is 1 day or 2 days. There's all kinds of sort of fixes for all of those things, all sorts of answers. So if you have specific questions about your specific yahrzeit, I probably can find it for you, because there's lots written on it, but I didn't include all of it. Yeah, Ruth.
I've always wondered, on the days when we have Yisker for holidays and Yom Kippur, do I light just one candle for all the people I'm saying Yisker for? Or do I light one for each one? Or do I light like one for my parents and one for my husband, or 3, or?
Yeah, so I think the custom is generally to light one for all of your loved ones on big holidays like that. I will tell you though that there was something that there was a piece that I read, not a piece, like a text that I read that I didn't include, that does mention if you happen to be in the house with your siblings, like, do you each light a candle for your loved one? And the answer is that you can do that, and that you actually should do that. So if you're, in a home where 3 people are remembering the same person, it's actually the custom to light your own candle in memory of those people. But in terms of lighting for multiple people on a holiday, I would say generally people do one, because it can get, you can light a lot, you can end up lighting a lot of candles on those holidays. Let's look for a moment about tzedakah. So I think Catherine said this before, sort of honoring Sarah Horowitz's memory because she gave tzedakah, and I think that's exactly what this is about. So Rabbi Artson comments on it, and the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch eventually comments on it, but the idea is that the sages, I like the sort of the middle one the best. The sages say that on Rosh Hashanah, both the living and the dead are judged. And this is difficult to understand since only the living perform deeds in this world. The answer is that this judgment of the dead is based on the influence that a person continues to have, for the good or for the bad. So if those who knew the deceased use of his legacy for inspiration to help others, then it is accrued merit that can benefit the deceased in the eternal world of the souls. So you're kind of like elevating their, adding to their memory. As Gary was saying about, remembering a grandparent or something like that, it seems like it would be an even higher mitzvah, right? Because you're doing it for somebody who can't. And I think I like this explanation, and I felt like this was really sort of touching in the way of remembering, of honoring someone who's passed away, because obviously they can't continue to give tzedakah for themselves, but you are doing it on their behalf, and it benefits both the deceased and also you. Yeah, Dara.
I just want to say it sounds like The Good Place, if you've seen that show.
I have not. But tell us.
No, just sort of in the calculus of who ends up in the quote unquote good place. The people who have the most influence for good in the world.
Well, listen, we talk a lot in our tradition about this world and the world to come, right? Is this mitzvah going to benefit you now, or is it going to benefit you in the world to come? And tzedakah, here we're saying both, right? You can give tzedakah while you're living, and you can give tzedakah on behalf of someone who has passed, and you're sort of benefiting both yourself and the person who has passed. And then the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch kind of codifies it a bit, that says, even though the saying of Kaddish and prayers are helpful to the souls of parents, yet they are not the main thing, right? It's not necessarily just saying the Kaddish is not the end game. That the most important thing is that children walk in the path of righteousness, because with that they gain heavenly favor for their parents, which I also kind of liked, sort of carrying on the memory. And then just to touch on fasting, because it's so it seems to be everywhere. I just wanted to bring us one piece on fasting, which I think sort of covers it all, which is that it's a mitzvah to fast every year on the anniversary of the death of one's father and mother, as an inspiration to repentance. So kind of mimicking or mirroring the fast of Yom Kippur, right? That we fast on Yom Kippur for out of repentance, to examine deeds on that day and lament in wrongdoings. And by doing this, here we go with Gan Eden, Gary, by doing this, one will bring merit to his or her father and mother, so that they will be exalted in God Eden, and sort of their soul will live on. And this idea that you're supposed to sort of mimic the holiday of Yom Kippur. And we know that we've mentioned this, light candles on Yom Kippur for remembrance. And so too, do we talk about repentance. Dara, is your hand still up? No. Anybody else? Ruth, I think your hand is also up, but that's okay. Marcia.
Yeah, I have a question about yard site on holidays. We have, like my father's on Hanukkah. We have several people in the Kahal who have a Purim yard sites, and this whole issue of celebrating and kind of mourning, which takes precedence, especially since this is not at the time of the funeral, time of the death. This is forever.
Yeah. So on certain
weddings.
Right. So there are certain times when you move it. I'd have to look exactly at the sources. But generally lighting the candle and saying Kaddish is okay on those days. Like we still have those services, right? We still have moments for Kaddish. And so, but I think that you are right, which is like balancing, certainly if you're talking about the burial and the funeral, on Purim and on Hanukkah, you're not supposed to eulogize, right? You're not supposed to, because you're supposed to be joyful on those holidays. And so you kind of have to balance that. But in terms of the yard site, it's less, I think you're supposed to move it. There are fewer times I think that you're supposed to move it, but I would want to know this specific holiday that you're asking for and look it up before I give you a definite answer. Gary.
Actually, it was interesting because I was thinking about the eulogizing thing too, as my mother-in-law died on Pesach. And I was taught that not because it diminishes the joy to eulogize them, it's just that there's nothing more to be said. It's so holy, the person died on the Chag, that everything there is to be said is said. So you're supposed to study Torah instead of giving a hesped.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so that's another custom that was there, but wasn't like in enough places that I felt like it was reputable about studying Torah, studying Mishnah or something, and to honor a loved one. Also leading the service is an honor that you would do on somebody's yard site, you know, like leading, meaning you might lead the service on your parents' yard site. That actually is connected to what we talked about last week about saying the Kaddish, less so than actually leading the service, but also mentioned as part of observing a yard site. And yeah, there's definitely reason for eulogizing or not on those days. And I'm sure I've said this before, but typically when you end up in that situation, rabbis or children of the deceased or whoever will say, you know, I know we're not supposed to eulogize, so I'm just going to say a few words, right? And you kind of like get around it by being able to, you don't say nothing. I think that would be that would feel wrong, but yeah, that's great. Any other thoughts before we close? Yeah, Jean.
So my husband's yard site is Yom Kippur. So when which is fine for saying Kaddish, except I have to get there very, very early because there is no Kaddish on Yom Kippur, except for the
Pesukei Zimra.
Right, except for the I'm blanking. Well, you know what I mean. Except for the Yisker.
Oh.
But anyway, so Rabbi Lou, when my husband died, Rabbi Lou told us, me and my kids at the time, he said, well, you should come to the Mincha service before Yom Kippur and you can do the Male then. And so we did that for a long time. I did that, the boys and I did that when they lived with me, and then I did that. And then, and then a subsequent rabbi, I guess it was Rabbi Glazer, said we stopped doing, we weren't doing any more yard sites on Mincha. So the question is, when do you do it? When do you do it? I mean, I just pick a time convenient for me, but if I'm going to Minyan on Sunday morning anyway, I do it the Sunday before, whatever, whatever it works out. But I mean, is there a time? I mean, what do you do? I guess you've covered it in the sense that you pick a time and you just do it.
Yeah, I think that you pick a time and you stick to it. But I think that the closest day, the closest day that you can. So like you said, if Yom Kippur is on a Friday, you might come on a Sunday morning or something like that. And I think that it's worth evaluating, why we took them off of Shabbat. I almost remember like people coming for Shabbat Mincha and then having to say, well, we'll say Kaddish and you can have an Aliyah, but we don't say the El Male. And it's, now having sort of gone down the rabbit hole of looking through these sources, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it's good to, kick up dirt around some of our customs. And that's why we're doing this class, which is like, why do we do the things that we do? Is it totally arbitrary? Is it totally up to the rabbi? Is it sort of reflective of the community, et cetera? So all good thoughts. Gary, did you have something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this may be an interesting way to conclude this, but you talk about the Shulchan Aruch and the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and today you mentioned, I'm not sure I've heard you mention before, the Rema, which is Rabbi Joseph Isserles, and the interesting thing that I only learned recently, I mean, the Shulchan Aruch is the set table is what it means, and it is Sephardic.
Sephardic.
So the Rema came along and he wrote the Mapa, which is the tablecloth. And that is a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, which teaches us all the way Ashkenazim do things differently. And it is interesting that you brought that in today, because sometimes they disagree. And that's where we supposedly look to for our sources is the Mapa and not the Shulchan Aruch.
That's right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the Shulchan Aruch can inform our decisions, but you're right that it's Sephardic, and so we don't always take it from there. And the interesting thing about the Ramah is that, as you saw the one we looked at today, like he totally went off he went to yard site when they were talking about the Haftarah and where it fits in the Torah portion, right? So he's like, oh, and also something that you do during the Torah service, and he kind of squeezes his commentaries in where they make sense. But yes, definitely that the Shulchan Aruch is Sephardi, though I think that it's still like reputable and used at least to sort of lead us to some of the other commentaries and to try to figure out those customs. So, but yes, definitely a good point that Sephardi, that we do have different customs, Ashkenazi and Sephardi, and it's something to recognize and remember. Thank you guys for joining me for these past 6 weeks. It's been interesting and definitely fun for me to dive into some of these topics in more depth. As I said I shouldn't say this while I'm recording. I said to Gary, what was I doing for 6 years of rabbinical school? Like, we didn't learn any of this stuff. So so it was definitely interesting for me to be able to tackle some of these topics and learn them with you, go a little deeper than I knew even before. And of course, the learning doesn't stop here. We're always asking questions. I always